Alright, this is video 2. This is about templates. Again, you can go to www.sixgunguitars.com and take a look at that. There's full instructions, and there's also different ideas for template making and whatnot. Templates are pretty individual, so there's not a lot of actual numerical instruction for it or dimensions given, just because depending on what you're going to be doing, the template's going to look different every single time, and depending on what you want to make, your template might not look exactly like mine. And here's a couple of different headstock templates. I got one of these off of an old Gibson that my grandfather owned. Same thing for this one, just a little bit shorter on the next place here. And then there's one that I came up with, which I use pretty consistently, which even has my tuning post locations drilled into it. Another nice thing too, it's got my dimensions listed right on it, so I know just at a glance how much wood I'm going to have to add to the headstock, if any, to make sure that this can fit on there to be cut out properly. Templates can be made for anything. These are a couple for some pipes that I was working on. An old Guarneri violin side, you get your half profile there. And also too, templates for fretboard tapering are fantastic, because this thing can be taken and put on a router table, and when you clamp another piece to it, a rough piece that's a little bit bigger, you wind up turning it upside down. I usually use a little double stick tape in between the two of them, so that way I don't have to reposition anything. But you can bring it onto a router table and just run it all the way around a flush cutting bit, and what it'll do is it'll duplicate this exact piece. And the nice thing about that is all you have to do is get this one piece 100% right. Take the time, do it right, the instructions are in there. Take the time, do it right, and when you run this thing through, you're going to get duplicates of it. So as long as this one's right, every single other one that you do is going to be right. And depending on the measurements for your taper and whatnot, again, those can be found in a book, those can be found online, those can be custom made depending on what you want. A neat way of getting your dimensions is to go and buy a pre-slotted nut, in a Martin or Gibson size, measure it so that way you know how much fretboard you're going to need down here, and then usually down at your saddle end it's somewhere between 2 and 1/4 inches, right around there. Kind of plot that out full size on a piece of paper, and you'll be able to determine what the width is at the 12th or the 14th fret, so that way you can measure effectively here to a line, mark it, measure here to a line, mark it, connect the two of them, and then remove that excess waste and sand it really nice. And again, if this is 100% straight, everything that's made after it is going to be 100% straight, which is fantastic. And back to the headstock ones, what's nice about this is after I glue up the headstock and put some ears on it if I need to, and I'll sand it flat, or I'll scrape it flat, and then I'll put a veneer over it so that you can't see any of that stuff. This guy gets clamped right in place, and I'll run a mark around it, and then I'll take it over to the bandsaw and cut it out. If you made this out of something a little bit thicker, you could probably use a flush cut router to route it out. I don't think the neck would really get in the way too much. You just have to watch your setup on how to do it. You might, getting in really tight in down here, it might be a little bit of an issue, but you get a really, really nice flush cut all the way around, which is fantastic. And again, having this clamped on here nice and straight, I follow it right through with my drill locations right after that, so that way I know that my tuning machines are 100% set, and I know that they're exactly in the place that I want them to be. And making a template is fairly easy. What I like to normally use is 1/8 inch thick MDF sheets. These are available at Home Depot, Lowe's, all the big stores. You can use 1/4 inch if you want, and I recommend that if you're going to be doing something that's actually going to be cut using that flush cutter bit, just because it gives a little bit more material on the side, so that way the bit has something to ride along. Whereas this is fairly thin, and getting the precision down so that way the ball bearing rides on here and doesn't miss anything else, and the blade still cuts the piece underneath, sometimes it can be a little bit problematic. So for something like that, a 1/4 piece is going to be a lot better, because that's usually the size of most of the ball bearings that are on those things. It's seen a little bit bigger, but on most just regular flush cutting non-raveting bits, that ball bearing that's on there, the actual spinning bearing that's on there, is usually about 1/4 inch thick, and then it's all cutter below that. So again, you got the MDF here. I mean, to make something simple, say like a headstock template, really the only thing that you need to know is the width on the bottom, which in my case is 1 11/16. So what I would do would be to draw out my basic for my nut side, and then as far as length goes, length of my other template is about 6.5 inches. So if we were to draw that out on here, again, this is just rough. What you really want to do is draw this out yourself, and draw it out at a point where you can control the dimensions, really take your time on it, and come up with a nice unique headstock shape, because really this is going to be your guitar. So unless the customer is asking you for something specific, it's probably a good idea to go ahead and have some fun and make something that you'd actually like to see. So what I do is I mark a center line in between the nut location, and I mark another line for my top. And then what I'll wind up coming in and doing is I'll do one side of it. So I'll come up with a neat little shape, do one side of my piece. And the reason that we're only going to do one side is because this thing has to be precise. It has to look good. It has to be even and uniform. So the best way to do that is to do one side and do it correctly, do it nice, and then what you're going to wind up doing is taking a piece of paper and laying it over and duplicating it. And I'll be able to show you that in a second. So I've already got my shape, and again, if you don't want to have a symmetrical shape, then you don't have to have a symmetrical shape. It's just with most acoustic guitars versus electrics, most of the headstocks have a very symmetrical shape to them. So what I've got so far, I actually kind of like it. I've got a little half of a guitar peg head there for my template. And what I'm going to go do now is I'm going to grab a quick piece of paper, and I'll show you how to trace that over. This is a little bit longer version because we went ahead and put the template right on here. If you draw it on a piece of paper first, it's a little bit easier because there's a little less transferring back and forth, but this still works. So what I do is I take a mechanical pencil and I put the lead all the way in it, so that way I just have a little stump here on the end. You can use anything else in the shop, a little scrap of wood, something that's sharp and easy to write with. And what you do is put it right over the top, and depending on if you can see through your paper or not, you might have to look through it. But what you wind up doing is taking this pencil and drawing over where these lines are. And what that's going to effectively do is transfer those lines to the paper. Now when those lines are transferred to the paper, we'll wind up tracing them through and then reversing it and putting it on the other side. And here, let me finish this up, and we'll get to where it is. Now this paper, this is a little bit better copier paper than normal. I think this is the 24-pound stuff, so it's a little bit harder to see through. The cheaper stuff is definitely the way to go. But now we've got the design duplicated on this piece of paper. So what I'm going to do from here is fill in my lines, and I'm going to fill them in and make sure that I rub them really good, because I want to add a little bit of extra lead to them, because I want to be able to see them from the other side because of this paper situation. So get everything marked out, including the center lines, because the center lines are nice points of reference for laying it back out over there. Okay, so now we've got the other side effectively drawn on here, and now we need to get it down onto here. So the way that we do that is you flip it over and you actually draw the lines that you had on there. So I'm going to draw these lines on here just to copy it. And again, go ahead and make sure you leave a good amount of pencil marking, because once we turn it over and do it again, we're going to need to have a little extra pencil on there to make sure everything goes through okay. So now we got the opposite profile drawn. One of the easiest ways to do this and to get it right is to just give the paper a little bit of a fold right on those centerline markings, so we know exactly what this piece is supposed to look like, and then fold it over and lay it right on that center line. Take the paper and flip it out so that way we can see everything, and again, move your pencil lead in. Now come over those lines that you drew, and this will transfer those lines to the wood. So now that I've got the lines on the wood, and they're not too dark, they're dark enough to see though. So now I'll come back and fill them in with a regular pencil here, so that way they're nice and easy to see, and again, in the future they're going to be nice and easy to cut, because that's the next step. Alright, so I got my headstock shape. I'm pretty satisfied with it. It looks pretty even for winging it. Now the next thing that you're going to want to have to do is mark the locations for the tuning machines. If you use different tuning machines all the time, then you probably don't want to do that. You can measure it out at the time. But me, I pretty much use a consistent set of tuning machines all the time, so I know what kind of width that I'm looking at for getting those things out there and getting them in the right position. So what I'm going to do is, just for spacing right now, I'm going to set my dial caliper to 1 inch, and I'm just going to put a couple of little marks on here where I'd like to see my tuning pegs go. And that'll at least give me just a little bit of reference points for where I want to finally put these things. What I'll do is I'll wind up cutting this shape out, and then after it's cut out, we'll wind up go ahead and putting the locations on there for the tuners. So now here's the easy part. All you do is take it over to a bandsaw, take it over to a scroll saw, and cut out the shape. And really, really nicely, especially here on this that's supposed to be very straight, make sure that gets really nice and straight. Come in with a nice curved set of sanding blocks and sand all that stuff off, and then you'll have yourself a nice peg head template here that all you have to do is take it, move it over to whatever guitar you're using, lay it over the head, trace it out, and cut it out, and you'll always have the exact same repeatable shape every time. And again, while you're taking the time to do it, take the time to design something that isn't, everybody else's. Take the time to design something that looks neat. I mean, this might be a little bit pointy for some people, but again, it can be refined, to suit different customers. You might be able to take one template like this and make 3 or 4 offshoots of it that look just a little bit different from each other. I mean, when I started with my very first template, I had the template for my grandfather's old guitar, and I just didn't like that it was so close down here, so I made one that had a little bit longer neck extension on the bottom to it, so that way I had just a little bit more pull and a little bit more play on the strings before they actually met the tuners. And these are about as square and as bland as they come. But I mean, that was the style of the guitar that I was copying. Again, this is a little bit more curvy, a little bit more pointy, but things like this, again, can be refined. These curves or these points can be rounded off. These can be rounded off. This can be swooped down. There's a lot of different things that can be done with these templates. And again, making a set of templates just makes it so that you really only have to make something one time, and then every other time it's going to be repeatable and it's going to be accurate, as long as this one is accurate. So take the time, do it right, make sure it's accurate, and you'll have a great set of templates.